I have my husband again, Joshua, and you've met him before. We're still talking about marriage. So today he will be asking me questions. And this is no planned questions or something that we talked about. They're going to be random so that we can be as authentic as we can. So, welcome, Joshua.
And I'm very excited to be part of this with my wife. And by the way, she's the one who started it, and so I'm just following in. Briefly, my first question I would ask you, sweetheart, is we're speaking of marriage. So far, what would you say about your own marriage?
I would like to say marriage is such a beautiful thing to begin with because God created marriage. And like you said last time, you mentioned that marriage has to be centered on God. God has to be in the center of marriage for it to be able to function. He has to be the counselor. So I look at marriage of something that is the most beautiful thing because God created marriage and we understand that from the Bible. But personally, for me, and being in this marriage, I look at it as a beautiful addition to my life. Look, when you're young, you have these aspirations and dreams, and I've always dreamed of wanting to be a married, have a Cinderella wedding, and live in a castle and happily ever after. And I could say, looking at the from the biblical point of view, that's what it is. But in the real life, that's not what it is. It is work. It is putting your interest aside, meeting in the middle, having that other person come into your life, and then you become one. Because the Bible tells us that man will leave his family and cleave to his wife. And that's is that what it says?
Yes, it does say
Okay,
that.
good. I want to make sure that we're in
It says
context.
that. Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
make sure that's it, we are in context. And from that, when you grow and you have this person you never grew up with, and was creating this person way before the beginning of time, just as much as he says in his word that I knew you before you were formed in your mother's womb. And having that, and he had that in mind and thinking about me, and now we are here together. That's the most beautiful thing. So I look at marriage as the most beautiful thing that God created, and from that comes many blessings. That's what I can share in a nutshell for now.
Would you think marriage is something that is a man's desire, or is it God's desire? And if it is man's desire, how can then we better it? Or if it is God's desire, how can we as men embrace it or enjoy it? I think you spoke about that marriage is the best thing you would share with people. You would say. So, would you call it as something that men desire, or is something that God Himself desires? Or how would you put it?
I'll look at it this way. It is God's design.
Okay.
It was designed by God because everything that God created, He put His thought process in it, and He saw how beautiful it was. So it is His desire, and He has a design of how it works. Okay. So with my own interest coming into God's design, I have the desire to be part of something that God created and make it as beautiful as it can be based on how He wanted to function. So as I follow into God's footsteps, and the marriage is how can I put it? Is the marriage was designed, the most beautiful thing that we can come out with in marriage is working the way God designed it, because there is certain ways that it has to function. Like when you were talking last time, you mentioned that there are times that you are lax, you want to do things a different way, and I have a way of wanting to do things, and that I think this is the best way. But I have to come with the mind of understanding that we are two different people here, and what's my part in this union. So here's one thing that I can bring to the table as far as our marriage is concerned. One thing that interests me that I figured out later on in life, in our marriage, is my husband does not remember numbers. That's not his thing, unless they are mechanical. If anything to do with engineering, he's good. He can do anything, put an engine together in his head, and then come out of there and fix it. But when it comes to remembering things like birthdays or his
date,
ID, or our anniversary, he's not good at that.
No.
Here's the problem that I used to have, that I would say we used to have, is sometimes he could be somewhere where he's filling some paperwork and he calls me for his social security number, which is the ID, another form of ID. And he'll call me, honey, what's my social? And I'll give it to him. And then another time too, he will go somewhere, honey, what's my ID? What's my social? And I'll get frustrated, like, you should know those things. Why don't you remember that? I told you all the time. You write it down, put it somewhere, memorize it. But every time he would call me. And I finally got to the point that God spoke to me just through those kind of situation where he doesn't remember those things. And he said, that's why I put you in his life. That's why you are the partner that fills his life.
Right.
That part he does not remember. You are the helper.
You were speaking about how God reminded you that you are to help me. And this was concerning the fact that I call you for dates and I call you for my social security number. And I think a few times I've called you for the date and the address of the house, especially if we have just moved. I was pulling out the gospel here that speaks about it. It is Genesis 2:18, where it says, and the Lord God said, it is not good that man be alone, and I do make to him a helper. So I think I've always emphasized, I've had times whereby I share with other men and I say, hey, if you don't have anything in your life, you don't need a helper. But if you have something in your life as a man, in other words, a man must have something first that he needs help with, so that when a woman comes into his life, you can value the help that comes in your life. Amen. And like I think we've spoken about how the times when me and my wife, we would partially separate because we were not agreeing, and the moment when she's not home, I feel the difference. Why? I feel the difference that in our kitchen nobody's there. I feel the difference that with our kids, no mother is there. I feel the difference that the whole house, I don't know what to do. But if you were here, I would know what to do, because I can ask you, sweetheart, do you need help? What can I do? And even when I'm somewhere, I know my wife is there. So you are this helper that I can't do without. Speaking on that, And speaking about choosing or finding a helper,
Why are you smiling?
because the question I'm about to ask is gonna point on something personally between me and you. Do you remember when I married you? I was not this devout Christian. I was a believer, but I was not active in church. What do you think were your hardest moments in you marrying someone who was not as active as you were in church? And I'm speaking about my character towards you and me being your husband and then being a father to your children. Where do you think, if suppose we had grown together in church and doing together in things in church, and I'll be honest with you, I never became a youth when I grew up. I was never a youth in church. I would go to church with my grandma, but I never went to never was in a became a youth like what our children went through. So, what are the challenges that you feel you had challenges? Would you say all was well? What will be your opinion, or what is your experience?
Here is the thing: when you marry someone that you have fallen in love with, in my instance, let me say that all is beautiful when you are loving each other, when you are going to the movies together, when you are planning dates and everything is happening.
So that part was nice.
That part was nice. Oh, that part was nice, was good. But what I didn't foresee was the participation that we're going to have as far as going to church is concerned. Mm-hmm. But also let's remember one thing. There's one thing that we get to remember is I met my husband when I was 17. I was in junior high and he had just finished high school. So we were at a wedding. That's another story for another day, how we met. But we dated back and forth many times on different, not so long, but it was like sporadic moments during that time, from the time I finished high school and probably 2 years after that. And I was in church, he wasn't in church. But here's the thing. In the back of my mind, I was always thinking, I always want somebody who is involved in church, who is more involved in Christianity and things like that. And he was, just not as active. But, so we went separate ways. But it was my decision, not his. He was so much in love. He wanted to marry me as soon as I finished high school. And in my world, that didn't make sense. So I always called
because I was older than you.
You are older than me, but not very much older. You're like a year and almost. You're 2 years older than me. But it's where there's love. I loved it. I loved everything. It was not about the age and anything like that. I don't know. I was young. Let me just say that. But he had made up his mind. He wanted to marry me, and I was not ready for it. There were other things that contributed to that anyway. But that's another video for another day. However, we went separate ways for quite a long time. We met again when we were broken from the relationships that we were in. So here we are meeting again, and we are two people who loved each other from way back when. Mm-hmm. We meet again, we fall in love again, and then we married. So we married at a time when we know that this is the person that I was supposed to be with in the beginning. This is the person, and I love this person, such that everything else that, as far as are they involved in church or anything else, was secondary. The love that I had for you is what I was going with.
I remember you dropping me off at the shop many times, and you would proceed to church. Because that was my part of my turning point to being active in church. But my wife never really pushed me to go participate in church. She always participated, and so she would drop me off at the shop, and I would say, when you are done, come and pick me up and we go for lunch. Was that a difficult time for you with the children, to be dropping me off and you going to church and you being in the pews alone as my wife? And I bet sometimes you had people asking you about me. Where's your husband? Was that anything that was difficult for you, or is something you would say it was tolerable?
It was difficult. It's difficult to know the truth and walk in this truth that you fully believe in, and walking it alone. When you're agreeing on everything else, the one thing that I know that is, you never was against God, like don't go to church, don't talk about God or anything else. It was never.
I've always loved him.
So I was always being in a marriage. Being in a marriage, it is knowing each other's interests and honoring that. So you honored that, allowed me to go to church with the kids, and we would sit like in a Bible study or in a session where you hear other people talking about, for me to be here at church today, I had to escape with the kids and tell them that we are going to a movie or something. But I never had to do that, although at the time we had 2 kids. But he allowed me to go to church, and never had an issue with that. So I was doing whatever I was doing. I wanted to make sure that we have the basic foundation for our children of Christian foundation, which was very important to me, because that's how I was raised, and I knew the importance of that. So I wanted to make sure that our kids have that too. Did I dream that you will ever be part of that? It was my heart's desire. But that's when you start to learn and grow, and knowing that, okay, this is marriage. I am not going to leave him just because of that. This is the man that I married. Now this is the reality. So that Cinderella part is not there anymore. That's not Cinderella part. But this is the marriage. And I know that it's knowing the Bible that says you have to leave your husband because he's not going to church with you.
Well, God, in that part, God had to draw me in a different way, because those days when you would drop me off, I would work, and man, I could never solve anything. Even when I left home, planning that by the time you pick me up, I would have finished the vehicle. I had weeks after weeks. I would go to the shop and break something. Something would just break whilst I'm putting it back, or whilst I'm pulling it, something breaks. And I began to realize that my Sundays were no longer being profitable. So that's when I finally said to my wife, I said, you know what? I ain't going back to the shop anymore on Sundays. I'm going to be joining you, because it became very unproductive for me. And so I started going with my wife to church on Sundays.
But at the same time, before you finish that part, is here I am already in the marriage, right? But the Bible says, do not be unequally yoked. So that part was never something that I processed before.
Would you consider that to have been unequally yoked?
At the time, if I was looking at the way I look at things now, let's say we were not married.
Yes.
I probably would have not. But thank God I did not. Because even I've heard many people who teach on marriage, and even just people who really honors their marriage, they never say leave your husband because he's not a Christian. We may be unequally yoked. It is my part. The one who knows who Christ is, the importance of marriage and who Christ is, should pray for that one who is not not walking in the ways of God.
It's so funny you say this because I had a time when, we were not agreeing and we were going through a difficult time. And I remember myself, you know how sometimes you have these false choices of feeling like, oh, I think there's someone better out there. And I remember so well, God one day said to me, Joshua, Leah is a gift from me. And so when I look at it, whilst we're discussing about this, I'm now looking at, I was not this dedicated man in serving him, but he gave me a perfect gift, someone who was already serving him. And I believe that God himself does the impossible. And I think because he does the impossible, he always finds what is fit, and he knows who he can give to somebody. I'm trying to get to the point that, man, never brag yourself by thinking you got here, or never brag by feeling like, oh, I'm the one who proposed you, I'm the one who brought you into this life. Because when God told me Leah is a gift from me and I've given her to you, I began to see that there was no effort of me in you being my wife, but it was him alone who saw it worthy that you and me would be a husband and wife. And so I began, and that also helped me to overcome the mind of trying to think there's an alternative, the mind of thinking, oh, I can marry someone else. Because now, if I think I'm going to marry someone else, that means it's going to be me who's going to have to solve every issue in it. But whilst I am living faithfully in what God has given me as a precious gift, hey, I can always call unto him, which is what he did. He told me one day, I remember one time when we were living at 480 and I was about to leave the house, and we spoke about something. I think it was about the car insurances. And those days I used to snap. Snap is, I used to just get angry. And whilst I was standing there, God said to me, Joshua, if ever Leah gives you a problem, let me know. I went like, wow. But my joy was not for God telling me, if ever you give me a problem, I should tell God, because then I began to feel like, ooh, I don't want to report my wife to the Lord. It's the same thing as me and my brothers and my sisters. I didn't like to run to my dad to report my brother, because I didn't want to see my brother being punished by my dad. So some of the things that my brother did to me that were wrong, I tried to solve it with him. I ignored it. But that made me stronger, and that made me be able to build a better relationship. And I'll be honest with you that ever since God told me that, I've never gone to God to say, Lord, Leah is giving me a problem. But rather, I know the prayer I've always prayed is, Lord, I've disappointed my wife. Please help me. And it works. It works. It works. It works. I'm looking at you, my friends. It works. If ever you are having problems with your loved one, with your wife, stop arguing with her to fix it. But just tell the Lord, Lord, I'm having problems with my wife. Can you help me?
But it's so